The air in Salt Row was thick enough to chew. It was just past 7:20 in the evening, and the Harbor Integrity Board's annual kiosk auction was packed solid. This wasn't high society. This was Port Garrison's working waterfront, come to fight over the privilege of selling fried clams and anchor-shaped keychains to tourists for a season. The square smelled like low tide, diesel, and nervous sweat. I was leaning against a brick pillar, sketchbook in hand, pretending to work. I sketch for the city. Sometimes it's a community mural proposal. Sometimes it's drawing the face of a trembling witness in Kestrel District Court. Tonight, the city wanted vibrant energy. All I saw was desperation and humidity. My eyes weren't on the crowd. They were fixed on my sister. Nomi was standing near the cheap plywood dais, clutching a clipboard to her chest. She was 7 months pregnant, the swell of her belly straining against the official blue HIB polo shirt. She was coordinating this mess, and she was wilting. A bead of sweat traced a line down her temple, and she kept wiping her palms on her maternity slacks. She looked small, overwhelmed, and entirely out of place. The crowd noise was a dull roar, an auctioneer testing a microphone, fishermen arguing over zoning, gulls screaming overhead. Then, the noise didn't just fade, it shattered. It was replaced by a voice, not a shout, not yet, but a low, resonant frequency that cut through the humidity like a blade. "This is unacceptable." Silence. In Salt Row, silence is unnatural. It's a vacuum. Every head in the square turned, a slow, magnetic pull. He was standing by the reserved seating area, a section of flimsy folding chairs separated by a cheap velvet rope. He was tall, dressed in a suit so dark and minimalist it looked like a hole in the humid air. He was cold. That was the only word for him. Cold like a piling on the winter dock. I didn't need the whispers to know who he was. Vasco DeMarco. His name was technically only on the DeMarco Foundation, the organization that funded half the city's youth centers, and on the Black Harbor Consortium, the entity that owned most of the useful waterfront. But in Port Garrison, his name was really whispered in relation to the Monarch Circle, the shadow government that decided which way the tide really turned. He was looking at a small, laminated seating chart in his hand, then at the empty chair, then directly at my sister, who was the nearest person wearing an HIB logo. "I was told my representative's seat was here," he said, his voice dangerously level. "It is not—" Nomi flinched. She swallowed, clutching her clipboard tighter. "Sir, I can check the main list. Sometimes the placards get moved." "This placard," DeMarco said, tapping the card in his hand, "was confirmed. I'm sure it's just a simple mistake, sir. If you'll just—" "This," he said, and now his voice did rise, a controlled detonation that silenced the gulls, "is not a simple mistake. This is incompetence." Nomi flinched again, a full body recoil, and a small, hitched sound escaped her. A half gasp, half sob. That was the sound that lit the fuse. I don't remember thinking, I remember moving. I pushed off the pillar, my sketchbook dropping into my bag. I cut straight through the crowd, shouldering past a confused councilman and a reporter. My pulse wasn't racing. It was a single, hot thud in my ears. I felt like a live wire. I planted myself directly between the mountain in the suit and my 7 months pregnant sister. I had to look up. He was even taller up close. His face was all sharp angles and unforgiving planes. "I don't care who you are," I said. My voice was low, but it didn't shake. "You don't yell at a pregnant woman." The silence that followed was different. It was brittle, astounded. Behind DeMarco, 2 men who had blended perfectly into the shadows suddenly became visible. They weren't dressed like security. They were dressed like him, just cheaper. They shifted their weight, a subtle, synchronized movement. One of them, the one on the right, let his hand drift, just slightly, toward his waistband. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't have to. The air crackled with the implication. Vasco DeMarco didn't look at his men. He didn't look at my sister. His eyes dark, unreadable, and utterly devoid of warmth were locked on me. He wasn't angry anymore. He looked assessing, like he was studying a new, interesting species of insect. He tilted his head, a slow, deliberate motion. A fraction of his mouth ticked upward. It wasn't a smile, it was a calibration. "Take me there," he said. The air rushed out of the crowd in a collective gasp. He hadn't misheard. He'd heard the unspoken "go to hell" hanging in my stare, and he'd accepted the invitation. My blood was so hot it felt cold. "Fine," I snapped, my chin high. "Hell has rules. You lower your voice, you sit down, and you apologize to her." "Lark, no," Nomi whispered behind me, her hand grabbing the back of my shirt. The main HIB manager finally scrambled over, his face pale and sweaty, wringing his hands. "Mr. DeMarco, sir. A terrible misunderstanding, a seating error. Oui. DeMarco held up one hand, just a slight gesture, and the manager stopped talking mid-word, his mouth open. He broke eye contact with me and looked at Nomi. The ice in his expression didn't melt, but it smoothed over. It became polished, flat, unreadable. "My apologies, Miss Navarro," he said. The voice was smooth, too smooth. The confusion was mine. I mistook efficiency for error. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced a card. It wasn't a business card. It was thick, heavy stock, the color of charcoal, with nothing on it but a single, embossed logo I didn't recognize. He didn't hand it to her. He placed it gently on the podium, next to her trembling hand, a quiet promise, a private line. He was watching me as he did it, not her. He knew who the real audience was. I looked at the card. I looked at Nomi, who was staring at it like it was a coiled snake. I looked back at him. I snatched the card. It was heavy, just as I'd thought, cold to the touch. I turned, took 2 deliberate steps to the public trash receptacle, the one overflowing with sticky soda cups and mustard-stained napkins, and dropped it in. I turned back and stared him down. If the square had been quiet before, it was now a tomb. The murmurs that started were low, horrified. Did she just... In front of him, she threw it away. "In Port Garrison, you don't turn down Vasco DeMarco. You absolutely, under no circumstances, throw his token in the trash in front of the entire waterfront." DeMarco's face remained a mask, but his eyes changed. The assessment was over. A decision had been made. He gave a single, sharp nod, not to me, not to Nomi, to the HIB manager, who nearly collapsed in relief. Then he turned and walked away. His steps made no sound on the cobblestones. The 2 shadows detached themselves from the background and fell in behind him. He didn't look back. He was just gone. The only thing left was the scent he'd left behind. It hung in the air, displacing the smell of salt and diesel, something clean and bitter, like expensive cologne and burnt orange peel. The crowd started breathing again, a ragged, collective sigh. The auctioneer, his voice shaking, started babbling about the first kiosk. Nomi let out a shaky laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Lark?" I turned to her, my body finally starting to tremble. I blocked the rest of the square from her view and gently unclipped the event microphone from her polo. "I'm here," I whispered, pulling her into a one-armed hug, shielding her stomach. "You're okay. I'm here." It was an hour later, after I'd bullied a volunteer into getting Nomi a chair and a bottle of water, that my phone vibrated in the back pocket of my jeans. I pulled it out, an unknown number. A single text message. "Friday, 8 o'clock. Don't keep me waiting. V.D." My blood ran cold. He hadn't put a number on that card. He'd already had mine. I jammed my thumb onto the screen, deleting the message, deleting the thread, blocking the number, but I couldn't delete the image of his eyes. I'm an artist. I work with charcoal. I know how it smears, how it stains, how it sticks in the grain of the paper long after you've brushed the excess away. The look in his eyes as he'd apologized to my sister, it was already a stain I couldn't erase. I live in Briar Key. It's not a neighborhood, it's a compromise. My loft is the borrowed airspace above a working boatyard, all creosote-soaked timbers and the constant smell of varnish. The roof is corrugated tin. When it rains, it sounds like a frantic drum solo. I'm up here, surrounded by my canvases, listening to the harbor breathe and groan. By day, I'm a different person. I'm Miss Navarro, the Kestrel District Court sketch artist. I sit in silence, my charcoal flying, documenting the sharp, sterile lines of justice or whatever passes for it in Port Garrison. My job is to capture the truth in people's faces, the tremor in a witness's lip, the defiant tilt of a defendant's chin. By night, I'm back here, under the tin roof, painting murals, trying to splash enough color on this city's gray walls to make them feel like a home instead of a cage. The green neon sign of the Tackle and Tide bar across the water paints my studio in shades of emerald and shadow. It's a good light to paint monsters in. After the auction, after I'd scraped together the shreds of Noemi's composure, I brought her back to my loft. She sat on my drop cloth-covered sofa, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking. The adrenaline from Salt Row had drained away, leaving her pale and vibrating with a low-level fear that had nothing to do with a rude billionaire. "Lark," she whispered, staring into the tea. "I'm scared." I handled it. "Noam's. He's just a man." "No," she said, and a tear finally broke free, tracking a clean line through the faint dusting of salt on her cheek. "It's not him. Not really. It's Eli." Eli Shore. The name landed in the room like a dead weight. The father of her baby, the man who was supposed to be picking out cribs with her, the man who, for the last 3 weeks, was vapor. He was an agent with the MVM, the Maritime Verification Mandate, a glorified harbor cop with a federal badge, which in Port Garrison just means you have more expensive enemies. He didn't just leave. "Lark," she choked out, the mug rattling in her hands. "He disappeared. Right after that data leak at the MVM. I stopped wiping my brushes. I'm in the courthouse every day. I hear things." The whispers had been getting louder. The MVM was leaking like a rusty bulkhead, and the Monarch Circle Vasco DeMarco's organization had just lost a very significant, very expensive set of containers. They'd vanished right off Pier 13, a magic trick in broad daylight. The official word was logistical error. The rumor was that the MVM was tearing itself apart looking for an inside man, the one who'd turned off the cameras and scrambled the manifests. Nomi looked up at me, her eyes wide with a terror that dwarfed the incident at the auction. "They think Eli was the inside man," she whispered. "His name, it's on a list. Lark, a bad one. The people who lost those containers, they think he helped steal them." The air left my lungs. "Vasco DeMarco, Pier 13. "Nomi," I said, crouching in front of her, trying to keep my own voice from shaking. "What does this have to do with you?" "What if they think I know something?" she cried, the words tumbling out. "What if they think I know where Eli is or what he took? That man tonight, he runs everything. What if he—" I grabbed her hands. They were ice cold. "He doesn't, and he won't," I said, the words feeling like rocks in my mouth. "No one touches you. I don't care who he is. No one—" It was the same promise I'd made in the square, but this time it felt heavier. This time, I knew I was lying. I couldn't protect her from him. The next day was Tuesday. I was trying to sketch a new mural proposal, kids from the quay reaching for a stylized sun, but my hand kept drawing sharp, angular shadows. A delivery guy buzzed up to the loft, looking lost. "Lark Navarro." It was an orchid, a single, perfect, white phalaenopsis in a minimalist slate vase. It was impossibly beautiful and completely sterile. There was no card. On Wednesday, it was dahlias, a huge, exploding bouquet of them, the color of a deep bruise, almost black. Again, no card. Just the heavy, sweet scent filling my turpentine-laced air. On Thursday, I was waiting by the door. The delivery guy flinched when I opened it. This time, it was a cluster of black wax flowers. They looked like polished obsidian, cold and unreal. This time, there was a card, the same heavy, charcoal gray stock from the auction. It wasn't a note. It was a taunt. 3 words in precise, sharp handwriting. You dropped this. He was mocking me for throwing his other card in the trash. I threw the flowers, vase and all, into the industrial dumpster behind the boatyard. Friday came. I had ignored the 8 o'clock text from 2 nights ago. I was at the Driftglass Community Center, staring at a 30-foot stretch of peeling paint that I'd promised the neighborhood kids I'd turn into an ocean scene. My budget was $0. My grant application to the City Arts Council had been pending review for 6 months. My phone buzzed, an email, not a text, from the DeMarco Foundation. RE Project Briar Key Rising Mural. Miss Navarro, your grant application has been reviewed and approved. Full funding has been allocated. The materials budget has been transferred. I stared. I didn't apply to his foundation. I applied to the city. I logged into the community center's bare-bones bank account. My heart stopped. The pending review grant hadn't just been approved. The amount wasn't the $3,000 I'd asked for. It was $20,000, a number with 4 zeros. It was already there. Cleared. He hadn't just opened a door. He'd bought the hallway. My hands were shaking. I pulled up the text I'd deleted. The number was still in my blocked list. I unblocked it and hit call. He answered on the first ring. Not a hello. Just silence. Waiting for me. Stop it, I said, my voice tight. Stop what? That voice. That low, resonant rumble. Over the phone. It was worse. It was intimate. I could practically smell that bitter orange cologne. The flowers, the money. You can't buy me. You can't buy my silence for how you treated my sister. There was a pause. The money, he said, and his tone was almost gentle, which only made me angrier, is not a bribe. It's an investment. I don't want your investment. It's an investment, Mao, he repeated. In the place where you're human, you paint walls, you build things. I respect that. The flowers were an apology. An apology, I scoffed. The orchids were for my behavior. The dahlias were for yours. You shouldn't have thrown the card away. It was rude. I was speechless. And the black ones. Those, he said, a subtle shift in his tone, were because I liked the way you looked when you were angry. A hot flush crept up my neck. Don't, I snapped. Don't what, Lark? The sound of my name in his mouth felt like a trespass. It's Navarro, I bit out. And you know exactly what... There it was, a sound, not a laugh. It was the acoustic shadow of one, a low vibration in his chest that the phone barely picked up. Navarro, then join me for dinner tonight. Absolutely not. The Harbor Light Hotel, 8 o'clock. We'll be civilized. The Harbor Light, the glass-walled restaurant overlooking Salt Row, where it all started. I can't, I said, grabbing the first, truest excuse I had. I'm working. I have to finish sketches for a victim impact statement, a hearing tomorrow morning. Then work, he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Bring your sketches. I'll sit far away, silently. I'll learn some manners. He hung up. Not a goodbye, just the click of a disconnected line. I shouldn't have gone. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in my loft, to lock the door, to send the money back, but I couldn't. Because he hadn't asked. He'd stated. And he knew where my sister lived. He knew where I worked. He knew my bank account. He knew I painted walls. He knew... I went. I wore my courtroom clothes, black slacks, a gray blouse, my hair pulled back, armor. I brought my sketch pad and my case of charcoals. The Harbor Light was all low light and clinking glasses. The maitre d' didn't even ask my name. Miss Navarro, your table is ready. My table was by the window, overlooking the dark water of the harbor. His table was 2 tables over, against the far wall, shrouded in shadow. He was exactly as he'd said he'd be, far away, silent. He was nursing a dark liquid in a short glass. He didn't look at me. He just existed, a tangible weight in the room. It was the strangest, most tense meal of my life. I ordered a soup I didn't eat. I opened my sketch pad. I was supposed to be drawing the face of a woman who'd had her jaw broken, but my charcoal kept moving, forming the sharp line of his jaw instead. the way the low light caught the edge of his immaculate white cuff. I kept sketching him from my peripheral vision, a study in controlled shadow. He never moved. He never looked. He just drank. After an hour of this silent, high-stakes theater, I couldn't take it anymore. I threw a $20 bill on the table, snapped my sketch pad shut, and left. I didn't look at him as I walked out. The cold salt air outside was a relief, until I got to my car. My old beat-up hatchback was parked under a flickering streetlight, and it was leaning, tilted sadly to the right. Both passenger side tires were flat. Not just flat, slashed. The rubber gaped open in ugly, deliberate wounds, a violation. I stood there, frozen. This wasn't random, this was a message. But from who, DeMarco or someone angry about Eli? A problem, Navarro. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. He was standing 10 feet away, in the shadow of the hotel's awning, hands buried in the pockets of his suit trousers. He must have left the second I did. "You did this," I whispered. It was an accusation. He didn't move. His eyes scanned the dark street, past me, around me. "No." "How do I know that?" "Because," he said, his voice flat and cold, "if I wanted to stop you from leaving, you wouldn't have made it to the door." He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking past me, into the deep shadow of the alley across the street. A flicker of movement, a drunk, maybe, a lookout. Vasco's hand came out of his pocket. He didn't wave, he didn't point, he just lifted one finger, a single, subtle, precise gesture. Across the street, the shadow detached itself from the wall. It wasn't a drunk, it was a man, and he was suddenly, violently grabbed from behind by two other shadows I hadn't even seen. There was no sound, just a muffled thump, like a sack of wet concrete being dropped, and the man collapsed. He was dragged, limp, back into the total darkness of the alley. My heart was pounding so hard I felt sick. I couldn't breathe. Vasco turned his attention back to me. His face was unreadable. He looked at the slashed tires, then at my face. "I'm no knight," he said, his voice quiet, almost rough. "I don't save people." He took a step closer, the scent of him, that bitter orange and cold air wrapped around me. "But my people," he said, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "They don't get to bleed when they're standing under my roof." He pulled out his phone, his gaze never leaving mine. "A car will be here in 2 minutes. It will take you home. Your vehicle will be repaired and returned to your loft by morning." I can't." "It's already done." He looked back at the alley, his jaw tight. "You have my apologies for the interruption. Port Garrison is forgetting its manners." He didn't wait for a thank you. He just turned and walked back into the hotel, leaving me alone under the flickering streetlight, my useless car keys in my hand. He hadn't just given me a ride. He'd claimed me, my people. My hatchback was back in its spot under the loft by sunrise, just as he'd promised, not a scratch on it. The two new passenger side tires were a different brand from the driver's side, but they were pristine. It was a reminder Vasco DeMarco fixed what he claimed. But my people didn't sit right with me. It was a brand, and I wasn't his property. And bleeding under his roof meant he saw the entire Harbor Light Hotel, maybe the whole city, as his roof. The fear for Nomi was a living thing in my gut. Eli hadn't just stepped in a puddle. He'd walked off a pier, and my sister was tethered to him. I'm a sketch artist. I'm paid to see what others miss. My studio wasn't just a place to paint, it was my evidence room. I cleared my largest corkboard, the one I usually used for mural concepts. I tacked up a map of Port Garrison. I drew a tight, red pencil circle around Pier 13. I pinned up a photo I'd snapped of Salt Row during the auction, right before the confrontation. I was connecting dots, but the thread was invisible. I needed thread. I called Rhea Kincaid. Rhea and I used to sit on the courthouse steps, sharing lukewarm coffee, me sketching the lawyers, her scribbling in a notepad. Now she was the sharpest investigative reporter at the North Star Press, and she still ran on bad coffee and adrenaline. "Lark Navarro," she answered, her voice already sounding like she'd run 3 miles. To what do I owe the pleasure you finally punching a judge? I need harbor gossip, Rhea, unofficial. What's the real story with the MVM? I heard her chair squeak. Unofficial lark. Gossip doesn't cover this. The MVM is eating itself alive. It's not just a leak, it's a flood. The buzz is that there's an internal unit, they're calling it the Task Fire Unit, that went rotten. They're not just looking the other way. They're actively using MVM authority as a shakedown racket. They seize contraband, then sell it back to the highest bidder. So they're dirty, I said, sketching a badge on my notepad, then scribbling it out. They're filthy, Rhea corrected. And it gets better. Word is, they got greedy. They didn't just shake down some small-time crew. They hit a major shipment, a Black Harbor Consortium shipment. Vasco. Rhea, I said, trying to keep my voice even, have you heard the name Eli Shore? A pause. Yeah, MVM. He's on the Task Fire roster, and he's been off the grid for 3 weeks. Why? Lark. He's the father of Nomi's baby. The silence on her end was heavy. Oh, Lark, help. Okay, be careful. This isn't just about stolen cargo. This is about dirty feds and the Monarch Circle. That's not a fight, that's a tidal wave. I know, thanks, Rhea. I hung up, my stomach churning. If Eli was part of the corrupt MVM unit. My laptop pinged, an email. It wasn't from Rhea. The sender was an anonymous encrypted address. The subject line was just a single period. Attached was a video file. My hand was shaking as I clicked it. The footage was grainy, time-stamped 3 a.m, 2 days before Eli disappeared. It was filmed from a distance, probably a crane. It showed a desolate corner of the container yard. I recognized Eli instantly, even in the watery night vision green. He looked frantic, pacing. He was meeting someone. A figure emerged from the shadows between 2 stacks of containers. This person was broader than Eli, moving with a swagger. The figure handed Eli a thick envelope. Eli took it, but he was shaking his head, arguing. The camera zoomed in. It was shaky, but it focused on the second man's hand as it gestured angrily. On his left pinky was a ring. It was heavy, silver, catching the dim light. The carving was unmistakable. A bird of prey, a falcon. I knew that ring. I'd sketched it 6 months ago in Kestrel Court. It was the signet of the Arclight crew. The Arclight crew weren't just rivals to Vasco's Monarch Circle. They were the plague, where Vasco used influence and cold, hard business. Arclight used chaos. They were the ones who dealt in the shadows, in the things that screamed. My blood ran cold. Eli wasn't just a dirty MVM agent. He was a dirty MVM agent taking money from Vasco DeMarco's mortal enemies. My laptop pinged again. Same anonymous sender. This one was just text. Don't pull Nomi into this. Tell Vasco to watch his back. I stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place like the tumblers of a lock. Tell Vasco to watch his back. Eli wasn't just missing. He wasn't just dirty. He was trapped. He was a man drowning between 2 warring ships, the corrupt MVM unit he worked for and the Arclight crew they were probably double-crossing. And he was trying to warn Vasco. My phone vibrated on the table. The number. The one I'd blocked, which had somehow reappeared. St. Meridian, noon. It wasn't a request. St. Meridian wasn't a church anymore. It had been gutted by a fire a decade ago, a hollowed-out stone skeleton. Until 6 months ago, when the DeMarco Foundation had generously donated funds to have it stabilized and turned into a community arts center. My arts center, the one my $20,000 mural grant was for. It was neutral ground, but the deed was his. I found him standing in the center of the nave, staring up at the bare, fire-scarred stone where an altar used to be. The air smelled like old incense, plaster dust, and him, that sharp, bitter orange. You wanted to see me. He turned. His presence seemed to suck the light out of the cavernous space. You received a warning. It wasn't a question. He knew. Of course he knew. I received a warning for you, I corrected, crossing my arms. It seems Eli Shore is concerned for your well-being, and he's meeting with the Arclight crew. Vasco's expression didn't flicker. He's concerned for his own. The Arclight crew are not known for their generous severance packages. He took a step toward me, his eyes analytical. You're investigating? My sister is 7 months pregnant, terrified, and the father of her child is caught between whatever this is and you, I said, jabbing a finger toward him, are at the center of it. Yes, I'm investigating. Good. That one word threw me off. Good. You see things. You're a sketch artist. You don't just see a face. You see the lie behind it, the fear, the desperation. I need those details. The MVM is compromised. The Arclight crew is moving in the light. I need eyes that aren't on my payroll. I'm not your spy. I don't want a spy, he said, and he was closer now. Close enough that I had to tilt my chin up. I want a cartographer. I want a map of the truth. You observe. You record. You draw your conclusions. You stay legal. You stay safe. And in return, I challenged, what's my incentive? In return, he said, his voice dropping, the sound resonating in the stone room. I put a perimeter around Nomi. I put one around your loft. The men who slashed your tires, they were Arclight. A message to Eli, delivered to his sister-in-law. They won't get that close again. I protect what's yours. My breath hitched. He'd known. He'd known who it was in the alley. My terms, I said, my voice shaking but hard. I'm not your employee. I keep the right to say no, to anything at any time. And you keep your distance when I need it. No more flowers, no more cryptic grants. We are not allies. We are two parties with a mutual interest in my sister's safety. He watched me for a long moment as if deciding, boundaries, he said, nodding slowly. Boundaries are how both sides survive. Agreed. Then if we're mapping the truth, I need the real coordinates. I pressed, Pier 13. It wasn't just containers. What did they take from you? His eyes hardened, the warmth of a glacier. The manifest said medical equipment, 3 containers, a legitimate shipment from my consortium. He paused, the air growing colder. The manifest was a lie. The medical equipment was a cover, padding for the real cargo. Which was maritime tracking chips, next generation, untraceable by conventional scanners. They allow the user to create ghost ships on any radar or make real ships disappear entirely. I felt the blood drain from my face. I'd grown up on the harbor. I knew what that meant. To blind the port. To blind the port, he confirmed, his voice chillingly flat. The Arclight crew isn't interested in medical supplies. They're interested in cargo that doesn't want to be tracked, cargo that doesn't go on a manifest. My mind flashed to the mural I was supposed to paint on these walls. Kids. Hope. They want to use our water to traffic people. Among other things, he said, if those chips go active, Port Garrison becomes a dark spot on the map, a black hole where anything and anyone can be moved without a trace. I swallowed, the dusty air thick in my throat. This was so much bigger than Eli. Okay, we have an agreement, but I'm not indebted to you. This isn't a debt. No, he agreed. Debts are messy. This is a transaction, a covenant. He held up 3 fingers, just slightly. We'll do it by the old harbor code. 3 saves, 3 truths. I frowned. What? It's simple. We're not allies, as you said, but we're in the same storm. If I have to pull you from the water, if I save your life, or your sister's, you owe me one truth, an honest answer to one question. No evasions, no lies. And if I save you, I challenged, the idea almost laughable. That ghost of a smile touched his lips, the one that never reached his eyes. Then I owe you the truth. 3 saves, 3 truths. It keeps the scales balanced. It ensures this is a partnership, not ownership. It was insane. It was a fairy tale rule for a nightmare world, but it was structured. It gave me leverage. It wasn't submission, it was a contract. All right, I said. 3 saves, 3 truths. He held out his hand, not in a friendly gesture. It was a seal. I looked at his long, strong fingers, the clean, trimmed nails. This was the hand that had silenced a square, the hand that had gestured a man into oblivion. I put my hand in his. His skin was warm, not cold as I'd expected, dry. His grip was firm, enveloping mine completely, and the second our palms touched, it happened, a jolt. Not a metaphor, a literal, sharp static shock that snapped from his skin to mine. It ran straight up my arm, a zip of heat that detonated in my chest. I inhaled sharply, pulling my hand back as if I'd touched a live wire. He must have felt it too. His eyes had widened, just a fraction, and he looked down at his own hand, then back at me. The air between us was suddenly thick, vibrating. "Boundaries," I said, my voice huskier than I wanted. Vasco DeMarco stared at my hand, then at my face, the echo of that jolt still hanging in the empty church. Boundaries. He agreed. Vasco DeMarco kept his word. That was the first unsettling truth I had to accept. 2 days after our handshake in the hollowed-out church, Nomi was no longer in her cramped, ground-floor apartment by the bus depot. He moved her, not to a steel tower, not to a penthouse, but to a quiet, unassuming brick building in Kestrel Heights. It was a residence called Women of the Wharf, a discreet recovery and transitional home for the wives and children of harbor workers who'd met trouble. It was clean, secure, and had a community garden. It was also funded, entirely and quietly, by the DeMarco Foundation. He hadn't put her in a fortress. He put her in a sanctuary. My role as cartographer began immediately. It meant I was now, bizarrely, part of his orbit. I was the observer, the shadow he permitted. I followed him to a meeting of the Maritime Trade Council, sitting in the back row with my sketchbook. Pretending to be a student, it was aggressively boring. They spent an hour, a full 60 minutes, arguing about new anchoring tariffs. But Vasco was hypnotic. He didn't lounge. He didn't intimidate. He sat perfectly still, listening. When he finally spoke, his voice cut through the bureaucratic droning. "The proposed tax on cold ironing," he said, "disproportionately affects independent haulers. You are calculating the control tax based on gross tonnage, not time at dock. That is an error. It needs to be revised." He knew the laws, not just the spirit of them, but the precise, weaponized fine print. He wasn't a gangster, he was a goddamn lawyer with a city in his pocket. The strangest moment came afterward. He'd just finished calmly dismantling a councilman's proposal, leaving the man sputtering. Then, as we were leaving, he stopped by the security desk. The gatekeeper was an old man, maybe 75, with a face like a worn-out boot. "How's the new hip, Sal?" Vasco asked, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. It's stiff in the rain, Mr. DeMarco, but the foundation," Sal flushed. "My wife. She said to thank you for the physical therapy coverage." Vasco just nodded, placing a hand on the old man's shoulder. "You held this gate for 40 years. Sal, the harbor owes you more than that." He was a man who regretted wasted time. Not apologies. He'd eviscerated the councilman, but he bowed his head to the gatekeeper. The contradiction was making my head spin. The next afternoon, I was in my loft, fighting with a 30-foot canvas, trying to make the gray Port Garrison sky look like hope instead of smog. The rain was pounding on the tin roof, a frantic, jazzy rhythm. I didn't hear the door. I didn't hear his steps. I just felt the air change. I turned. He was gone. But on my workbench, next to a jar of filthy turpentine, was a large paper cup of coffee. Steam was still rising from the lid. I picked it up. Scrawled on the side of the cup in a sharp, black script was a note. "Don't let the cobalt blue dry in the rinse cup. It stains." My heart did a stupid, frantic kick flip. I looked at my rinse cup. It was, in fact, stained a deep, permanent cobalt blue. He hadn't just dropped off coffee. He'd watched me. He saw me. He'd seen my lazy habits, the details of my work, and hadn't judged. He'd just observed. I drank the coffee. It was perfect. The jazz of the rain turned into a low, menacing bass line that evening. The fragile peace shattered. I was cleaning my brushes, the neon from the Tackle and Tide painting, my floor green. When I saw it, a car, a dark sedan, no lights, parked across the quay. It wasn't just parked, it was waiting. My breath caught. Arc light. My first instinct was to call Vasco. No, I was the cartographer. I was the eyes. I grabbed my phone and hit the number for the local pizza joint. I stepped out onto my narrow metal balcony, making my voice loud, artificially cheerful. Yeah, hi, I need a large pepperoni. What, no, it's Navarro, N-A-V, huh? While I pretended to argue about the address, I held my phone steady, angling it down at the car. I zoomed in. The driver was a silhouette. The car was nondescript, but the streetlight caught the license plate. I finished the fake order, went inside, and locked my deadbolt. I pulled up the photo. It was blurry, but the plate was readable. I ran it through a public reverse lookup. As I expected, plate not found, stolen, fake, But the camera had caught something else. On the dashboard, just visible through the glass, was a small, black object. I zoomed until the pixels screamed. It was an air freshener, shaped like a bird of prey, the falcon. My hands were shaking. I sent the image, cropped and sharpened, in 2 separate messages, one to Ria, one to Vasco. Ria replied in 30 seconds. That's Arclight's B team. They're watching you. Be safe, Lark. Vasco didn't reply, but 10 minutes later, a Port Garrison Harbor Watch cruiser rolled slowly down the quay. The dark sedan started its engine and pulled away. Not speeding, just disappearing. He hadn't sent a reply. He'd sent a response. Our lessons started that night. It was part of the truth map, he'd said. I needed to understand his world. We were at a quiet bar downtown, one I'd never been to. We sat in a back booth. This is a lesson in language, he said, nursing his dark, neat liquor. Look at that table. He indicated a group of 4 men in suits. Who is in charge? The one at the head of the table, I said. The one talking. No, Vasco said. The one talking is the wall. He's noise. The man in charge is the one on the end, with his back to that wall, facing the door. He hasn't spoken. He's the only one not drinking. He controls the exit. The man next to him, see how he pays. He holds the wallet. He's second. The wall is third. The 4th man, the one checking his phone, he's wallpaper. He's irrelevant. I watched. He was right. The man facing the door made a small, 2-fingered gesture. The wallet paid the check. The wall stopped talking. The wallpaper scrambled to keep up. My world was lines and colors. His was gravity and power. I traded him my own lesson. He came back to the loft, this time with the rain. He stood in front of my unfinished mural, his hands clasped behind his back. It's bright, nah, he said. It's supposed to be. I was mixing paint on my palette, my hands stained with ochre and raw sienna. I was trying to get the skin tone right for one of the children in the mural. He watched my brush. How do you do that? Make a person out of that. He pointed at the primary colors. It's not magic, I said, a little defensively. You just need 3 yellow, a little red, a little blue. That's the base for almost every skin tone. You just have to know the balance. The blue, that's the shadow. The red is the blood. The yellow is the life. I held out the palette to him, offering my brush. Here, you try. He looked at the brush, then at me. For the first time, he looked uncertain. He took the brush. He was clumsy, his large, controlled hand awkward with the delicate bristles. He dipped it in the red, then the yellow, then too much blue, creating a muddy gray. He frowned. It's just gray. You went too dark, I said, my voice soft. Too much shadow. He looked at the palette, then at his own hand. I was born in monochrome, Navarro, he murmured, a startling, vulnerable admission. I don't see the shades in between. I put my hand over his, guiding the brush. Then I'll teach you. That night, I dreamed of my mother. She was standing in my loft, but it was clean and sunlight was pouring in. She was holding out a single charcoal pencil to me, smiling. The ring of my phone sliced the dream in half. I woke up, my heart jammed in my throat. The loft was pitch black, 3:15 in the morning. I fumbled for the phone. Vasco? I answered. What? Someone's at Nomi's door. His voice wasn't calm. It was a low, controlled growl, the alarm system he'd talked about. I was out of bed, pulling on jeans in the dark before he finished the sentence. "I'm coming!" I'm already downstairs. I flew down the steps, not bothering to lock my loft, his car, a dark, silent sedan that probably cost more than my building, was idling at the curb. I jumped in. We didn't speak. The drive to Kestrel Heights took 4 minutes. The city was a blur of dead traffic lights and fog. We moved up the stairs of the residence, silent. Vasco was in front of me. At the top of the landing, he stopped. He put one arm out, flat, blocking me. "You just need to say, 'Stay behind me, Lark,'" he whispered, his body tense. "I will handle the rest." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. We could hear it now, a gentle, rhythmic knock-knock-knock on Nomi's door. Vasco moved, and he didn't charge. He just appeared. He stood beside the door, out of the peephole's view, and I stood behind him, my fists clenched so tight my nails were cutting into my palms. The door opened. A small, young woman in nursing scrubs stood there, holding a steaming thermos. She looked at Vasco's 6'3" frame, his face like thunder, and she squeaked. Nomi appeared behind her, tying a bathrobe. "Lark, mister. DeMarco, what?" The young woman held up the thermos, trembling. I'm Jun, the night volunteer. I brought Nomi some hot ginger soup. For the swelling in her ankles, I didn't want to wake her, but..." The tension didn't just break, it evaporated, leaving us all feeling foolish and weak-kneed. Nomi, seeing the look on my face, and let out a shaky, half-hysterical laugh. "Oh my God, you thought..." Vasco just leaned against the wall, closing his eyes for a single second. The coiled steel tension left his shoulders. We ended up on the front steps of the residence, the false alarm adrenaline draining away, leaving us cold and hollow. It was almost 4 a.m. "I was so scared," I whispered, rubbing my arms. "My heart, I thought they'd found her." Vasco watched the empty street. "Fear isn't the opponent, Lark," he said, his voice quiet. "It's the alarm system. It means you're paying attention. You did good." He didn't leave. I went in to sit with Nomi until she fell back asleep. When I came out, he was still there. He'd pulled one of the hard plastic chairs from the residence lobby into the hallway. He wasn't going home. He was standing watch. That was the first save. He was keeping his word. He was protecting her. I didn't leave. I went back to the lobby, found a stray piece of copy paper and the pencil I always keep in my pocket. I sat where he couldn't see me, and I drew. At dawn, I found him. He'd finally drifted into a state of rest, his head tilted back against the bland, beige-painted wall, his suit jacket wrinkled for the first time. His face, stripped of its control by exhaustion, looked younger and infinitely more human. He looked lonely. I didn't wake him. I left the sketch on the chair beside him. It was a drawing of him, asleep in the chair, the guard at his post. At the bottom of the paper, I paid my debt, the first truth. "I trust you. My first truth. I trust you." Felt warm for about 12 hours. Then Arclight set the harbor on fire, not with gasoline, but with bandwidth. It dropped on a Tuesday morning, a grainy, night vision video clip, just like the one Eli had sent me. But this one was professionally edited. It showed men, their faces blurred, being led in single file up the gangplank of a container ship. The audio was muffled, just the sound of water and low, urgent voices. And standing on the deck, hands clasped behind his back, watching the procession, was Vasco DeMarco. It was a digital fabrication, a lie constructed in a dark room, but it was good. The way the light hit the angle of his jaw, the way his suit jacket moved in the wind, it was just plausible enough. The implication was unmistakable. Vasco DeMarco, head of the philanthropic DeMarco Foundation, was trafficking people. Port Garrison's social media feeds exploded. It was a sewer. The whispers about the Monarch Circle, usually confined to bar rooms and docks, were now screaming headlines on every blog. DeMarco Foundation, a front for human trafficking. My trust felt naive, stupid. Rhea Kincaid called me, her voice already crackling with newsroom energy. "Lark, it's a smear campaign, but it's sticking. CBU is running a harbor security panel tonight. They've invited me." CBU, Citywide Broadcast Unit, our local news, desperate for ratings. "They want you to feed the frenzy," I said, sketching his face from memory, my charcoal strokes angry and jagged. "They want balance, which means they want me to add legitimacy to the rumor. But I'm going," she said, "and you're coming with me." "Me why?" "You're my assistant. You're going to carry my bag. Sit backstage and watch. When a ship sinks. The rats are the first ones to run for a new foothold. I want to see which rats show up to the panel." The CBU studio smelled like burnt coffee, hairspray, and warm electronics. It was a small-time operation trying to look big. Rhea was whisked off to the makeup chair, leaving me to play the part of the invisible intern in the cluttered green room. I opened my sketchbook and did what I do best. I watched. Politicians, a community activist I'd never seen before, and a nervous-looking MVM spokesperson. Then he walked in, Commissioner Calderon. I froze. It was the HIB manager from the auction, the man who'd wilted under Vasco's voice. He wasn't in his HIB polo tonight. He was wearing an ill-fitting suit, dabbing his bald head with a handkerchief. He looked terrified. He kept checking his phone, pacing into a dark alcove by the vending machines to take a call. I drifted after him, pretending to look for a bottle of water. I stayed in the shadow, my senses screaming. "No, I told them. It's too public," Calderon whispered into his phone, his voice shaking. Rune insisted. He said the video was just the appetizer. My blood went cold. "Rune? Jax Rune, the head of the Arclight crew." "Yes, he'll be there," Calderon hissed. "Tonight, Gray Anchorage, the old shipping warehouse. Just make sure the reception is ready when DeMarco shows." Gray Anchorage, HIB, Arclight, a reception. It wasn't a meeting. It was a frame. They were using the video to smoke Vasco out, and Calderon, the Harbor Integrity Board, was setting the trap. My fingers flew across my phone. My message to Vasco, Blunt, and Fast CBU. "Calderon is on the phone. He's with Arclight. They are setting a trap for you tonight at Gray Anchorage. A reception. Don't go." His reply was instantaneous. "Car is outside." I slipped out of the studio, leaving Rhea to her fight. The black sedan was waiting. I got in. The air inside was cold. "He'll have men there," Vasco said, his voice perfectly level. He wasn't asking. He was staring straight ahead as we moved through the city. "You're not listening," I said, my voice tight with panic. "You can't go. Calderon is HIB. He's working with Arclight. They're luring you. They want you to show up." "Of course they do. So you're not going?" He turned his head, and in the flashing neon of the streetlights, his eyes were like polished stones. "Traps," he said. "Still require supervision? I want to see who comes to watch." Gray Anchorage was a rusted steel carcass by the abandoned shipyards, smelling of salt, rust, and something dead in the water. We didn't use the front door. One of his men, Marco Kest, the same shadow who had stood behind him at the auction, met us, leading us through a dripping maintenance tunnel. We emerged onto a high, metal grid catwalk, 50 feet above the warehouse floor. I looked down, and my breath caught. It wasn't a meeting, it wasn't an ambush, it was a set. The floor was alive with activity. Massive studio lights, kinos, airy spots. C-stands were positioned everywhere. Reflective umbrellas tilted toward the center. 3 cameras on tripods. And in the middle of the floor, a stack of wooden crates, all stenciled with the Black Monarch Circle logo. They weren't luring him here to fight. They were luring him here to film, to create the evidence that the fake video needed, to catch him red-handed with his contraband so they could feed the story to the press. "They're waiting for you," I whispered, my voice echoing in the steel rafters. "They want you to walk right into the light." "And Calderon will bravely lead the MVM raid," Vasco finished, his voice a low growl. "The dirty MVM," I corrected, my mind racing. Ria's task fire unit. I watched the crew below. A young woman with a headset was adjusting a huge canvas backdrop, one painted to look like the inside of a container ship. "I'll be right back," I whispered. "Lark, no." Before he could finish, I was down the catwalk stairs, moving into the light. I walked straight onto the set, my sketchbook clutched to my chest like a shield. "Hey," I snapped at the girl with the headset. "You?" She spun around. "Who the hell are you? This is a closed set." "I'm from the commissioner's office." I lied, projecting as much authority as I could. "He's not happy. This key light is way too hot. You're blowing out all the highlights. And that backdrop," I marched over to the massive canvas. "It's crooked. It's completely off axis. It's ruining the forced perspective." "It's what?" "It's tilted," I said. "At least 12 degrees. It looks fake. It looks like a high school play." Before she could argue, I grabbed the heavy wooden frame and shoved with all my weight. The entire backdrop shifted, lurching. The painted lines of the ship's hold now visibly, comically crooked. "There," I panted. "Now at least the lines are dynamic." The girl was screaming at me. "You can't touch that!" I looked up at the catwalk. Vasco was gone. He'd seen my signal, the ruined shot, the sabotaged frame. Suddenly, a deafening fire alarm blared through the warehouse, a piercing, fake shriek. "That's not the cue," the headset girl yelled. The massive roll-up doors of the warehouse slammed open, and MVM vehicles flooded the space, red and blue lights painting the set in panic. But they were slow. They weren't raiding, they were staging. I saw the unit commander step out of the lead vehicle, and I froze. The car, the official MVM cruiser, its license plate, it was the same number from the stolen ArcLight plate on the sedan outside my loft, the one from my photograph. It wasn't just a dirty unit, it was this unit, Calderon's reception. Chaos erupted, the photo crew scattered, the MVM agents were securing the scene, grabbing the prop crates. In the confusion, one of Calderon's aides, a man in a suit, was on the catwalk. He stumbled back, tripped over a thick power cable, and pitched headfirst over the railing. He screamed. He was going to fall 20 feet to the concrete floor. Vasco appeared from nowhere, from the deep shadows under the catwalk. He moved like a panther. He didn't try to catch the man. He positioned himself beneath him and absorbed the impact, a brutal collision of bodies. He broke the fall, letting the man slide to the ground. The aide was gasping, bruised, but alive. A slow, mocking clap echoed from the shadows. Well, look at that. Jax Rune, the ArcLight leader, stepping out from behind a camera, his face split in a grin. The big boss has a soft spot. Good to know, DeMarco. My eyes darted. Rune was the distraction. Where was the real threat? I saw him. Across the floor, half hidden by a massive light stand, watching Vasco with cold intensity. He was wearing the ring, the falcon, the man from Eli's video. He was in shadow, but I was on a photo set. I ran to the main lighting panel. "What are you doing? Get away from that," the technician yelled. "Fixing the exposure?" I grunted. I slammed my hand on the breaker for the largest light, a high-intensity 5K spotlight. It hummed to life. I grabbed the fixture's handle hot enough to sting and angled it. Not at Rune, not at Vasco, but straight at the hiding place of the Falcon Ring Man. I hit the power. It was like the sun exploding. The beam hit him dead on. He cried out, throwing a hand up to shield his face, blinded and perfectly illuminated. He was exposed. Every MVM agent, every ArcLight goon, everyone saw him. He bolted and are scrambling for a back exit in the sudden, blinding glare. Lark Vasco's voice was a roar. He grabbed my arm, his grip like steel. "We're leaving! Now!" "But he's—" "Enough!" he snarled, pulling me back toward the maintenance tunnel as the MVM agents shouted in confusion. "You're not bait. You did your job." We were back in the car, fishtailing on the gravel as we tore away from the shipyard. The smell of ozone and burnt dust filled my lungs. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. He pulled over 2 blocks from my loft, killing the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. He turned to me, his face a mask of controlled fury. "That was my move. Navarro, you shouldn't have been on that floor." "It worked," I said, my voice shaky. "They didn't get the shot." "They got your face," he countered, his voice rough. "They know who you are now. They know you're not just a sketch artist." He scrubbed a hand over his face, letting out a long, hard breath. "But you saved the board," he conceded, his voice dropping. "You saw the trap. You saw the players. And you fixed the perspective." He looked at me, his eyes unreadable in the dark. "That's the second save. Yours. You saved me from walking into a frame." "My turn. My debt." "I have your truth," I whispered. He waited, the engine ticking as it cooled. "It's about Eli." His expression didn't change, but his posture did. He became perfectly still. "He is involved." I rushed, the words spilling out. "He was dirty. He took money from Arclight. I saw the video, the real one, but he's not with them. Not anymore." "He's a traitor," Vasco said, his voice flat. "He's a fool," I insisted, my voice pleading, desperate. "Vasco, he's scared. He's the one who sent me the video. He's the one who sent the warning for you. He's not just part of the problem. He's trying to disarm the mine. He's in too deep, and he's trying to find a way out." I finally met his gaze. "Don't kill him, please. He's all Nomi has. He's trying to do the right thing. Now, I know it. I had just asked the wolf not to hunt the rabbit." Vasco stared at me for a long, unbearable minute. He looked out the windshield at the dark, sleeping city. "3 saves, 3 truths," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "You paid. I won't hunt him." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "But," he added, his voice turning to ice, "if he crosses my path while I'm hunting Arclight, I can't guarantee his safety." He turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. "Go upstairs, Lark, and lock your door." I locked my door. I stood in the dark of my loft, my back pressed against the wood, and just listened. The only sound was the rain starting to spit against the tin roof and the pounding of my own blood, still high and frantic from gray anchorage. He was wrong. They didn't just get my face. They got my complicity. They saw me, an artist, move with purpose in a world of shadows. They saw me align with him. I wasn't an observer anymore. I was a target. A knock, not on my loft door, on the main boatyard door, downstairs. I didn't move. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Vasco." "Open the door, Lark. You can't stay here tonight." I went down the rickety stairs, my hand shaking on the railing. He was standing in the alley, the rain already plastering his dark hair to his forehead. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, just the white shirt and the dark trousers. He looked less like a kingpin and more like a storm. "I'm not going to Nomi's," I said immediately. "I can't. I won't bring this to her door." "I know," he said, his voice flat. "She's secure. You're coming with me." He didn't offer a choice. He didn't need to. I grabbed my bag, the one with my charcoal and sketchbook, and didn't even bother to turn off the lights. I just locked the door and followed him into the rain. His car was different from the sedans. This was a low, dark, anonymous coupe that seemed to drink the light. The drive was silent. We didn't go to the harbor light. We went to Eider Tower. I'd sketched Eider Tower for the City Planning Commission. It was a ghost building, a 30-story monument to speculative real estate, all dark glass and black steel, with a 90% vacancy rate. The lobby was a marble canyon, silent and cold. The DeMarco Foundation had a name on the directory, but it was just a name. We didn't see a doorman. We didn't see a guard. He used a key card in the elevator, then a code. Then he pressed his thumb to a scanner. The elevator moved, fast and silent, with no number to indicate the floor. The doors opened directly into the sky. The penthouse was less an apartment and more a climate-controlled atmosphere. The walls were glass, 360 degrees, overlooking the entire harbor. The lights of Port Garrison were spread out below us like a handful of scattered jewels. My loft, with its tin roof and turpentine smell, felt like a different planet. He walked to a panel on the wall. The elevator is biometric. No one comes up here unless I bring them. He gestured to the vast open-plan living room, furnished with minimalist black leather and chrome. There are security cameras in the main living area and the entryway. He led me toward a heavy oak door, but not in here. He pushed it open. The bedroom was the size of my entire loft, more glass, overlooking the black, rain-swept ocean, a bed large enough to get lost in. There are no cameras in the private quarters. None in this room, he said, his voice quiet, resonating in the huge space. He turned to me, his dark eyes searching mine. This is a fortress. Lark, not a cage. In here, you control the space. I nodded, clutching the strap of my bag. I felt small. I felt displaced. He watched me for a moment, then reached into the pocket of his trousers. He pulled out something small, holding it in his palm. It was a small, round disc of brushed gold, simple, attached to a thin gold chain. I won't lie to you, it's a location beacon, he said, his voice low. It's for emergencies. If you're in trouble, if I can't find you, I won't activate it without your permission. It's your choice. But after tonight, I am asking you to wear it. He wasn't forcing me. This wasn't a command, it was a plea, disguised as a request. This was the monochrome man, terrified of losing the one person who could see the shades. I looked at the gold disc, glinting in the low light. This was it. This was the covenant of 3 truths made real. It was a leash. It was a lifeline. I put my bag down. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I just lifted my hair off my neck. His breath hitched, just slightly. He stepped closer. His fingers, warm and calloused, brushed the skin of my neck as he brought the chain around. He was slow, his touch hesitant. He fumbled with the clasp. "I'll do it," I whispered. I took the chain from his hands, my fingers brushing his. That same jolt, that snap of static electricity, made my hand flinch. I turned away, facing the glass wall, and fastened the clasp. The small disc was heavy and instantly warm against my skin. I tucked it under my blouse. I turned back to him. My eyes never left his. I had made my choice. The air in the room was too thin. The silence was too loud. "Come," he said, breaking the spell. "You look cold." He led me to the kitchen, another temple of steel and black marble. He didn't ask what I wanted. He just moved with purpose. He heated milk in a small pot. He shaved dark chocolate into it. He took a single orange and, with a small, sharp knife, pared off a long, perfect spiral of the peel. The smell filled the kitchen, bitter orange and warm cacao. He handed me the mug. It was heavy and warm. Our fingers brushed, and this time, neither of us pulled away. "At the warehouse," he said, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain against the glass. "When I pulled you, did he, or any of his men, hurt you?" "No," I whispered. "I'm fine." "You're shaking," he said. He didn't reach for me. He just gestured, a small, controlled movement toward my arm. "Let me see." I looked down. Where he'd grabbed me, a faint, reddish mark was starting to form, a handprint. "Vasco." "May I?" he asked. His voice was a raw plea. This was the bell he was offering me, the right to say no. I set the mug down on the marble counter and nodded. He stepped closer, into my space. He didn't just grab my arm, he was excruciatingly gentle. He put one hand under my elbow, supporting it. With the fingers of his other hand, he lightly, so lightly, traced the outline of the bruise he'd left. His touch was electric. It wasn't about pain. It was about possession, an apology, a claim. "You're not safe with me," he whispered, his eyes on my skin. "I wasn't safe without you," I replied, my voice just as low. He looked up. His face was inches from mine. The controlled, icy mask of the Trum was gone. This was the man who had slept in a plastic chair outside my sister's door, the man who had looked clumsy holding my paintbrush. I don't know who moved first. Maybe neither of us. Maybe the space between us just collapsed. No, that wasn't true. I I raised my free hand. He went perfectly still, thinking I was going to push him away. Instead, I hooked 2 fingers into the crisp, rain-dampened fabric of his shirt, right by his collar, and I pulled, gently. He came to me like a man collapsing. The kiss wasn't what I expected. I expected it to be hard, demanding, like his voice in the square. It was the opposite. It was slow. It was uncertain. It was a question. His lips were soft, and for a split second they just rested against mine, a moment of impossible stillness. I breathed in. He tasted like chocolate and that bitter orange, and the rain. Then I pulled back, just an inch, and he didn't chase me. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. We were just breathing, sharing the same air. I could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, or maybe it was mine. A small, shaky smile touched my lips. "Your heart is racing," I whispered. "It's catching up," he murmured. He kissed me again. This time, there was no hesitation. It was deep and slow, and it was a promise. His hand moved from my arm, sliding up my back, a solid, warm pressure over the thin fabric of my blouse. It wasn't searching. It was anchoring, holding me, keeping me from flying apart. He whispered my name, "Lark." It wasn't a word. It was a prayer, an admission. I answered him. I slid my hand from his shirt, up his neck, and into his hair. It was thick, damp from the storm. I didn't pull. I just held. I tangled my fingers, holding him just enough to let him know he was wanted, that he wasn't alone in this. The kiss lingered, then broke, leaving us both breathless in the sterile kitchen. We didn't say anything. He just kept his forehead pressed to mine, his hand warm on my back. Eventually, he led me back to the bedroom. The bed had been turned down. We stood there, in the cavernous, dark room, listening to the rain and the faint, ticking sound of a clock somewhere. The adrenaline of the night, the fear, the chase, the kiss, it was all crashing down. He saw me shiver. He didn't invite me into the bed. He just gently steered me to sit on the edge. He picked up the heavy duvet, a cloud of soft gray cashmere, and draped it over my shoulders. Then he went into the adjoining bathroom. I heard water run. He came back with a glass of water and set it on the nightstand, within my reach. Such a simple, concrete act of kindness. The man who moved in monochrome was checking for bruises. He was bringing me water. He was making sure I was warm. I looked up at him. "Am I safe here?" He looked at me, his gaze so intense it was almost a physical touch. "We are safe," he corrected, his voice rough. "Because of us, together." He didn't move. He just stood there, watching me, the guardian at the gate. "I will be here in the morning when you open your eyes," he said, his voice low. "If you want me to be." He was giving me the choice again, the out, the bell. I pulled the duvet tighter around my shoulders, the exhaustion of the last week, the last night, hitting me like a wave. I smiled, a small, tired, genuine smile. "I'll want coffee," I said. "A lot of it." He smiled. It wasn't the ghost of a smile from the church. It wasn't the smirk from the auction. It was a real, slow, devastating smile. The ice didn't just melt, it shattered. It changed his entire face, erased the hardness, and left only the man who had looked lost holding a paintbrush. He didn't get in the bed. He just sat on top of the covers, his back against the headboard, his legs stretched out. A silent, armed, beautiful guard. "Rest, Lark," he murmured. And for the first time since Eli disappeared, surrounded by glass, high above the sleeping, dangerous city, I did. My phone buzzed on the glass-top table of the penthouse. It wasn't a text. It was a data drop, a set of coordinates from Rhea. "Switchyard 9, Old Freight Depot. He's there. Now." I looked up. Vasco was standing by the glass wall, looking down at the city, a mug of coffee in his hand. He hadn't slept. I hadn't either. He'd kept his promise, staying on the edge of the bed, a silent, watchful presence. Now, In the gray morning light, he looked more like a man than a myth. He saw the look on my face. Eli, he stated. Rhea found him. Switchyard 9. He put the mug down. He's running. Or he's waiting, I countered, pulling on the boots I'd worn the night before. I'm coming. No, you're the cartographer. You're not tactical. Vasco, I said, my voice hard. I know his face. You don't. He's terrified, and he'll bolt if he sees you or your men. If I go, he might listen. I touched the small, gold disc hidden beneath my shirt. You'll know exactly where I am. This was the deal. I'm not a princess in your tower. His jaw tightened. Keep your distance. My distance. You stay on the perimeter. You observe. You do not engage. Am I clear? Clear, I lied. Switchyard 9 was a sprawling, rusted graveyard of dead trains. The air smelled like creosote, iron, and the damp rot of the harbor. It was just after dusk, the sky a deep, bruised purple. We didn't drive to the coordinates. We parked a quarter-mile away and moved in on foot. Shadows in a field of shadows. He moved high, disappearing onto a dark gantry that overlooked the yard. I stayed low, my feet crunching on the wet gravel, slipping between two hulking, graffiti-covered boxcars. I found him. He was huddled inside an empty hopper car, clutching a small, black waterproof case to his chest. He looked like hell. He was thin, shaking violently, and his eyes were wide, darting to every sound. Eli? He scrambled backward, a small cry escaping him. Lark, oh God, Lark, you can't be here. They'll... Nomi is safe, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. I put her somewhere safe, but you're not... What is this? Eli the MVM. Arclight, you're caught. It's the same thing, he hissed, the words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate rush. You don't understand. The Taskfire unit, they aren't just dirty. They are Arclight. They're the ones selling the MVM shipping manifests, the security blind spots. That's how Arclight knew about the DeMarco shipment. That's how they knew about those chips. And you were part of it, I said, my voice flat. No, yes, at first. He was weeping now, scrubbing at his face. I thought it was just skimming, Lark, taking a percentage off seized goods that were going to be destroyed anyway. But then I saw the real manifests, the ones they were selling, the ones they were losing. It wasn't just electronics, it was names, people. They were using the port to move people. My blood ran cold, the ghost ships. I tried to get out, he whimpered. I couldn't. They own me. So I pretended to be deeper in. I became their inside man. I collected everything. I copied the data, the rosters, the payments to Calderon at the HIB. It's all here. He tapped the case. I was trying to get proof. Lark. Proof of Taskfire. Proof of Arclight. Proof to burn them all down. I swear. My second truth had been right. He wasn't a traitor. He was just a coward trying to be brave, and he'd gotten hopelessly lost. A train horn blasted from the far end of the yard. It wasn't a warning. It was a signal. It tore the night in half. Eli stopped breathing. They followed me. Oh, God, they followed me. Headlights, 2, then 4, then 6. They weren't using the service roads. They were black SUVs, flooding the yard, bouncing over the tracks, fanning out, Arclight. I looked up at the gantry where Vasco had been. He was gone. Run, I hissed, shoving Eli toward the back of the car. Now, toward the maintenance tunnels, under the overpass. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call. I just turned on the flashlight, pointing it at the westernmost gantry, and flashed it 3 times. The signal we'd agreed on in the car split, flanked them. High above, from the deep shadows of the steel beams, a single, sharp flash answered. He understood. We ran. Eli scrambled, but he was clumsy, half paralyzed by fear. The SUVs were getting closer, their high beams pinning us. They were hurting us. This way, I yelled, pulling him toward a steel staircase that led up to a concrete overpass. Lark, it's a dead end, they'll corner us. Just move. We clanged up the metal steps, the sound echoing in the yard, below. 2 of the SUVs skidded to a stop. Men piled out, shouting. We hit the top of the overpass. It was a concrete canyon. One way led to the main road. The other, just as Eli had said, was a dead end, blocked by a massive, unfinished concrete barrier. The men were thundering up the stairs right behind us. I shoved Eli toward the main road. "Run! Get to the other side! Don't stop!" "What about you?" I didn't answer. I reached into my sketch bag. I wasn't grabbing charcoal. I grabbed the can of silver spray paint I used for stenciling my murals. The first two Arclight goons, moving fast, hit the top of the stairs. They saw me. There. She's trapped. I ran, deliberately, toward the dead end. I shook the can, the rattling ball sounding as loud as a gunshot. I stopped at the barrier, turned, and sprayed. A huge, glistening silver arrow pointing past the barrier into the darkness of the unfinished construction zone. "She's trying to jump," one of them yelled. They charged. I waited until the last possible second. Then I darted sideways into a narrow 2-foot gap between the concrete barrier and the chain-link fence. The two men, blinded by their own momentum, their eyes fixed on my silver arrow, didn't see the gap. They didn't see the barrier. They slammed into the concrete wall at a full-on sprint. The sound was a sickening, wet thud and a grunt of pain. My art, a perfect, false perspective diversion. I scrambled down the other side, peering into the yard. The main action was unfolding below. Eli had made it back to the tracks, but he was cut off by the third SUV. At the same moment, the MVM cruiser, the Taskfire cruiser, the one with the stolen plate number, rolled in, blocking his escape. It was a pincer. Eli tried to climb onto a slow-moving flatbed car, a desperate, clumsy move. Vasco appeared from the shadow of the flatbed. He vaulted onto the car in one fluid, powerful motion. He grabbed Eli by the collar and hauled him back to the gravel, slamming him hard against the side of the train. Eli cowered. "Don't, please!" The Taskfire agents were approaching, hands on their waists. "DeMarco, step away, MVM business." "Is it?" Vasco said, his voice ice. "Looks like my business. This man is a thief." He spun Eli around, pushing his face into the rusty steel. From his own pocket, Vasco pulled a set of handcuffs, fake ones, with a trick release. He snapped them onto Eli's wrists. As he did, he tossed something small and silver onto the gravel near Eli's feet. The key. "You created this game, Eli." Vasco's voice was low, for Eli alone. "I'm just changing the rules." That's when the black sedan roared in. Marco Kest was at the wheel. He didn't swerve. He aimed the reinforced front end of the car directly at the Arclight SUV, pinning it against a stack of shipping containers with a deafening crunch of metal. The MVM agent spun, distracted by the crash. "Now, Lark," Vasco roared. I was already moving, scrambling down the emergency ladder on the side of the overpass, my feet slipping on the rain-slick rungs. The ground was farther than I thought. I misjudged the last rung. My boot slipped on the wet steel. I fell, but I didn't hit the ground. I was just caught. Vasco had crossed the yard in seconds. His arm was an iron band around my waist, crushing the air from my lungs. He'd pulled me from the ladder and into his chest, shielding me with his own body. It was a half second, a snapshot, the smell of rain, cold metal from the ladder, and the impossible, familiar warmth of his skin under his damp shirt. His heart was hammering against my cheek. "I've got you," he breathed, his voice rough. He didn't let go. He kept one arm locked around me, dragging me toward a dark, low opening in the concrete foundation of the overpass. A utility tunnel. Eli, free from the cuffs, was right behind us, clutching his case. We plunged into the darkness. We ran, stooped over, through a tunnel that smelled like mud and lime. Behind us, shouts and the sound of running feet. We emerged a block away, in a quiet, dark alley. We were panting, covered in grime and filth. Eli sagged against the brick wall, hyperventilating. He thrust the waterproof case at Vasco. "Here, take it. It's everything. The Taskfire roster, the private ledgers, the proof Calderon is taking a cut from Arclight. It's all there." Vasco took the case. He looked at Eli with cold, hard assessment. A high-pitched whine cut the air. I looked up. A drone. Small, black, with a single glowing red eye. It was hovering above the alley, maybe 60 feet up. Arclight, they were tracking us. I grabbed the high-powered flashlight from Vasco's jacket pocket, the one he'd used to signal me. Lark, what? I aimed it straight at the drone's camera lens. I thumbed the switch, not just on, but to strobe. The beam of pure, flashing light hit the drone dead on. The red eye wavered, the drone tilted, its motors screaming as the operator, suddenly blinded, lost control. It lurched, clipped the brick chimney of the opposite building, and spiraled down, crashing onto the gravel-strewn roof of a shed, a mess of shattered plastic and dead circuits. Silence. I was leaning against the wall, my chest burning, the heavy flashlight in my hand. Vasco was staring at the broken drone, then at me. He looked stunned. He looked almost proud. "The third save," he said, his voice rough. I nodded, breathing hard, thinking of the mission. Eli, the files, the drone. "No," he said, turning to me. The space between us was electric again, smelling of ozone and adrenaline. He touched my arm, where he'd grabbed me. On the ladder, I caught you." Oh, that was the save, not the tactical victory, me. My heart was doing a frantic, painful rhythm, half from the run, half from him. "It's my turn, then," I panted, my voice shaking. "The third truth." He waited. The sirens were in the distance now, but here in the alley, it was just us and the sound of our breathing. "Ask me," I said, meeting his gaze. He stepped closer. "Why did you really come tonight?" I looked at Eli, who was watching us. Pale and confused, I looked at the black case in Vasco's hand, the key to this whole mess. I looked back at Vasco, at the rain on his face, at the worry in his eyes that he tried so hard to hide. I took a breath, the air burning. "I'm not just doing this for my sister anymore." The sirens were getting closer. "I'm doing this for you." My third truth hung in the alley air between us, as sharp and cold as the sirens closing in. "I'm doing this for you." Vasco didn't look away. He didn't flinch. He just held my gaze, and in his eyes, I saw my truth land. He processed it, accepted it, and locked it away. The sirens were 2 streets over. He pulled me back from the mouth of the alley. "Not here." He turned to Eli, who was shaking, his face pale. Vasco didn't offer comfort. He offered a command. "My man, Marco is at the end of this alley. He will take you to a new safe house. You will not contact your sister. You will not contact anyone. You will wait. The data you provided," he tapped the waterproof case against his palm. "If it's good, you may get to see your child." It was the cruelest, kindest thing he could have said. Eli just nodded, tears streaming, and ran into the darkness. Vasco turned to me. "The game's changed. Lark, we're no longer mapping the truth. We're aiming it. We didn't use the case as a threat. We used it as an invitation." The next day, at 2 p.m, I was sitting opposite Commissioner Calderon in the Black Lark tea room. The place was all pale sunlight, whispering patrons, and the delicate clink of porcelain. It was the most civilized, public, well-lit place in Port Garrison. No one, as Vasco had said, starts a fight in a room full of witnesses drinking Darjeeling. The name of the place, the Black Lark, wasn't lost on me. I'd asked him in the car. His answer was a flat, "It's a rare bird. It thrives in harsh conditions." I didn't ask if he meant the bird or me. Calderon was sweating through his suit. He'd come because Mr. DeMarco had requested a private word about the future of the HIB. He thought it was a truce. "I don't understand," Calderon stammered, dabbing his upper lip with a linen napkin. "This meeting, the accusations from the CBU panel." Vasco was sitting next to me, perfectly at ease. He hadn't said a word. He just listened. My job, as he'd instructed, was to watch. I was applying his lesson. Calderon had taken the worst seat, his back to the room, facing a wall. He was cornered, and he'd done it to himself. His hands kept fluttering to his water glass, but he never drank. I'd already texted Rhea. We're seated, he's nervous. Stand by for 2:30. Vasco finally leaned forward, and the temperature in our corner of the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't raise his voice. He just placed Eli's waterproof case on the white tablecloth. It sat between the cream and the sugar, as black as a hole. "The Taskfire Ledger," Vasco said, his voice a low, polite rumble. "A very detailed, very compelling piece of accounting. It speaks of Doc 6. It speaks of blind manifests. It speaks of the Arclight crew." Calderon went from pale to gray. That's preposterous. Those are random audits. Internal, I don't..." He said the word random. I reached my boot under the table and tapped Vasco's ankle. The tell. Vasco continued, ignoring the man's sputtering. "I am not an MVM agent. Commissioner, I'm not a cop. I'm a citizen of Port Garrison, and this..." He tapped the case. "This is a stain. It's a betrayal of the harbor. You're selling off this city's honor, piece by piece." Calderon looked around wildly. He saw no escape. He saw the case. He saw the man. And he did what all rats do. He tried to bargain with the bigger rat. He leaned in, his voice a greasy whisper. "Look, DeMarco, you and I were businessmen. This Taskfire, it's a mess, but it can be contained." "Contained," Vasco repeated, his face blank. "A change in management," Calderon said, gaining a pathetic burst of confidence. "Arclight, they're sloppy. They're animals. But the arrangement, it's profitable. Dock 6, it's wasted on those independent fishermen. Why not give it to the Black Harbor Consortium? An exclusive lease. 100 years. You get the dock. You get cooperation. And we just make this ugly little ledger go away. We bury Taskfire." Vasco stared at him. He didn't even blink. "The harbor is not for sale." Calderon's last bit of hope sputtered out. "Commissioner," I said, my voice suddenly sharp, making both men look at me. "You're supposed to be a public servant. You're teaching the kids in Vasco's youth centers that the only way to get ahead is to steal. You're just teaching them to turn the lights off first so no one sees." Calderon looked at me, bewildered, as if I were a piece of furniture that had just spoken. He was so flustered. He didn't see the trap close. It was 2:29 in the afternoon. "Commissioner," I said, my voice all false sympathy, "you look terrible. And your phone, the battery, looks low. You must be getting 100 calls." He glanced at his phone, grateful for the distraction. "Yes, it's been ringing only 4%. "Here," I said, pulling my portable power bank from my bag. Let me plug that in for you. You can't be out of touch." He fumbled, handing me the phone. "Oh, thank you. Miss Navarro, you're very..." I took the phone. My back was to him, pretending to untangle the cable in my bag. What I was really doing was placing it next to the small transmitter I'd been given. I looked at my watch, 2:30. I didn't have to do anything else. Rhea did. A second later, every phone in the tea room buzzed. A news alert. A man at the table next to us gasped, "Holy hell!" A woman across the room dropped her spoon. Calderon looked around, confused. What is it?" His phone, in my bag, began to vibrate. Not a buzz, a frantic, unending shriek of alerts. I pulled it out and held it up, my face a mask of polite concern. "Oh, dear Commissioner, you are suddenly very, very popular." He snatched it from me. The lock screen was lit up. "North Star Press, High Commissioner Calderon, MVM's Taskfire Unit, and Arclight crew linked in massive port corruption. Full ledgers. Bank transfers leaked." The files from Eli's case were now on every screen in the city. Calderon didn't make a sound. He just collapsed in his chair, a broken, empty suit. We stood up. Vasco placed a $50 bill on the table for the tea. He looked down at the gray-faced man. "The harbor is no longer for sale, Commissioner." The fallout was immediate. The city exploded. The MVM was in total chaos. Calderon was arrested before he could leave the tea room. The Taskfire unit was suspended, its agents detained. But we hadn't won. We'd just kicked the hornet's nest. Vasco got the text while we were walking back to the tower. He stopped dead on the sidewalk. I saw his face harden. They're not running, he said. What? Arclight, they're not scattering. They're accelerating. They've lost their MVM cover. They're desperate. They're activating the chips. Tonight. He looked at me, his eyes dark with a new, cold fury. They're calling it blind signal night. They're going to take the port, or they're going to burn it. He grabbed my arm. You're going back to Eider Tower. Now. You'll be safe there until this is done. I pulled my arm free. No. Lark, this is not a discussion. That was a psychological play. This is a war. You're not a soldier. I told you, I said, my voice shaking with an anger that matched his. I am not a princess. I am not hiding in your glass tower. My sister is at the Kestrel Heights residence. My mural, the one you funded, is at the Drift Glass Community Center. That is my ground. I am not abandoning her. And I am not abandoning them. That's my answer. We stared at each other on the sidewalk. Two immovable objects. The city was in chaos around us, and we were, its still, silent center. He broke first. A harsh, frustrated sigh. Fine. You go to Driftglass. You're right. It's your ground. You're the symbol. You'll go with Nomi and the women from the wharf. You'll be their shield. I will, I said. But you will not be alone, he growled. My left-hand team, they'll be on every roof. You won't see them, but they'll be there. You stay inside, you lock the doors, you do not engage. That is the compromise. Driftglass was buzzing. The women were scared. Watching the news on a small TV. I moved Nomi and a half-dozen others into the main activity room. Away from the windows, I felt calm, focused. I was the guardian here. Just after dark, there was a knock. It wasn't a left-hand man. It was a delivery guy in a generic uniform, holding a large, beautifully wrapped gift box. For Miss Navarro, he said, smiling, a gift to congratulate you on the new mural. He handed it to me, and he was wearing gloves. As he turned to leave, his sleeve pulled back, just half an inch. I saw it, the silver, the falcon ring. My blood didn't just run cold, it froze solid. I looked at the box. It was perfect, a large satin ribbon, and running from the ribbon's knot, so thin it was almost invisible, was a microfilament wire, a pressure trigger. If I pulled the ribbon, if I opened the box, I placed it gently on the floor. Nomi, I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. Everyone, we're going to practice that fire drill we talked about. Right now, no running, just walk, quietly, to the community basement. They looked at me, confused. I pulled out the burner phone Vasco had given me, the one linked to his security. I texted the number for the left-hand team. Falcon, package, need cover sound. I started moving the women and two children, keeping my body between them and the box, quickly, quietly. As the last woman started down the basement stairs, it began the bells. The bells of St. Meridian, 3 blocks away, not a gentle chime, a deafening, rolling peal, an avalanche of sound, as if it were Easter and midnight all at once. The sound hammered the building, covering any possible noise, any panic. I locked the basement door from the outside. They were safe. I stood alone in the hallway, staring at the box. I texted one word to Vasco, our code, the one that meant the enemy was no longer at the gate, but inside. Fire! My phone rang less than a second later. His voice wasn't a voice. It was a controlled, violent roar. Are you out? They're in the basement, locked in. I'm in the hall. It was him, Vasco, the Falcon. He brought a gift. A terrible, ragged sound over the line. Him, breathing, or him, breaking something. Hold your position. Lark, do not move. Do not go near that box. They made a mistake. They came for you. The line was silent for a beat. I'm coming to you. My phone was still in my hand. His voice, I'm coming to you, still echoing in the hallway when the main door of Driftglass burst open. It wasn't Vasco. It was Marco Kest, his face a mask of cold granite, flanked by 2 others in dark tactical gear. They didn't look at me. They scanned the hall. "He sent us," Marco said, his voice a low, urgent clip. "The package." My hand, shaking, pointed to the satin-wrapped box. The man who left it the ring. It was the Falcon. A woman on Marco's team, her name was Sarah Witt. Vasco's strategist, knelt by the box, not touching it, opening a soft case of electronics. She was all business. "Go," Marco said to me, his eyes already on the exits. "Go where I'm holding this position." "This position is a decoy," he snapped, his gaze finally locking on mine. "The Falcon came here to pin you down, to pin him down. The real fire started 5 minutes ago. Pier 13. Vasco's already there. He needs his eyes." He meant me, not just his strategist, but his cartographer, the one who saw the lines others missed. "The women," I looked at the locked basement door, "are safer than he is right now," Marco said, pulling a sidearm and taking a position by the door. "We'll hold this ground. The package will be contained. Go, now. He's at the lighthouse." The bells of St. Meridian were still hammering the air, a holy, chaotic thunder that covered my exit. I didn't take his car. I took the keys to the Driftglass community van. My knuckles were white on the wheel. Pier 13 wasn't just on fire. It was a symphony of chaos. Arclight wasn't trying to burn the pier. They were trying to blind it. As I screeched to a halt, I saw the plan. They'd set off a series of explosions in a yard full of empty, condemned shipping containers. It was a massive, spectacular, and completely harmless wall of fire, a diversion. And it was working. The real MVM, the ones who weren't task fire, were disorganized, streaming toward the fake blaze. The remnants of the task fire unit, still on the same radio channels, were deliberately feeding them bad intel, scattering the city's response, pulling them away from the water. I heard Sarah's voice, crackling, sharp and clear, over a dropped Harbor Watch radio on the pavement. "All Monarch units, disregard the container fire. Repeat. Disregard. It's a misdirect, Marco. Lock down the west perimeter. Jax is at the lighthouse. The lighthouse is the target." I abandoned the van. The old, decommissioned lighthouse stood at the end of a long, stone jetty, a black finger pointing at the storm-dark sky. The path was blocked. 2 Arclight SUVs were playing chicken with a single, brave Harbor Watch patrol car, ramming it, trying to get past the barricade to reinforce their boss. I scrambled up a stack of pallets, my heart a cold stone. I was the observer. I had to change the map. I had my art bag, my constant companion. I didn't have a weapon. I had my tools. I climbed the metal ladder on the side of a massive 40-foot cargo container, my hands slipping on the cold, salt-dusted steel. I was high up, above the fray, the wind ripping at my jacket. I could see it all the Arclight drivers, blinded by their own high beams, and the Harbor Watch car, caught in their spotlights. I dug into my bag and pulled out my sketch mirror, a simple 8-inch round mirror I used to check my murals for compositional balance. I held it up. I angled it, catching the blinding white beam of the Harbor Watch spotlight. I focused it, a single sharp disk of light. I aimed it directly at the driver's side window of the lead Arclight SUV. The driver, expecting darkness, got the sun in his eyes. He yelled, instinctively wrenching the wheel. He swerved hard, crashing not into the barricade, but into the side of the second Arclight SUV. A hideous sound of tearing metal. The path was blocked, not by the police, but by their own wreckage. I used the opening I'd created, sliding down the container, and ran. I ran down the jetty, the air tasting of smoke and the sea. I found him at the base of the lighthouse. He wasn't alone. Jax Roon was there, flanked by 2 of his men. Jax was holding a ruggedized laptop. Vasco saw me. His face, for one split second, was a mask of raw terror. Not that I was in danger, but that I was here. "Port Garrison," Vasco said, his voice a low growl, stepping slightly to put himself between me and Roon, "is not your chessboard, Jax." Jax Roon laughed, a high, barking sound. "Chesno, no. DeMarco. It's not a chessboard. It's a blank slate, and I'm the artist now." He held up the laptop. He hit a key. Vasco's earpiece, which he'd jammed in on the way, shrieked. I could hear Sarah's voice, high and panicked. "Vasco, the grid is down. It's down. I've lost all shipping channels. They're blind. Everything is dark. I can't see the ships." Jax held the laptop screen out for us to see. The harbor map, usually crawling with dozens of green electronic signatures, was blank, empty. "The ghost ships," I whispered, "the words stolen by the wind." "Exactly." Jax grinned, his eyes manic. "Total darkness. The port is blind. My cargo, the real cargo, is moving in, and not a single radar in the city can see them." He pointed out to the black water, and as a bonus, the harbor queen, he indicated a massive city rescue vessel, its lights visible in the distance, is heading straight for the Trident Reef. Their navigation just told them it's 3 miles of open water. They'll be torn apart in 5 minutes. "The light," I said, my voice sharp. Vasco looked at me. "The main lamp. Can you turn it on?" "The light won't help," Jax barked. "It's all part of the system. It's compromised." "Not the new light," I said, pointing up at the massive, dark, ancient Fresnel lens, the one that hadn't been lit in 30 years. The old one, the emergency auxiliary. Vasco understood instantly. He looked at Jax. "This is still my harbor." He grabbed my arm and shoved me toward a rusted, heavy steel door at the base. "The panel. Do it." "Stop them!" Jax shrieked at his men. They charged. Vasco didn't fight them. He intercepted them. He moved like he had in the alley, a brutal, efficient collision. He used his shoulder to send the first man crashing into the stone wall. He drove his elbow into the second. A hard, definitive stop. It was over in seconds. I found the panel. It was old, covered in rust and salt. I grabbed the main breaker, a massive iron handle, and threw my entire weight onto it. A deep, groaning thunk echoed through the stone. Above us, the giant, 30-year-old lamp sputtered, hummed, and then exploded to life, bathing the entire pier in a single, blinding, steady white light. "It's just a light, you stupid girl," Jax roared, pushing Vasco off him, scrambling to his feet. "It's a voice," I yelled back, but it was a steady voice. It wasn't a signal. I remembered the mural, the one at St. Meridian, the one I'd spent weeks researching, staring at the old maritime charts. Lighthouse signal. Port Garrison, 1920 danger, reef, port turn. The breaker panel was too slow. I needed to pulse it. I stood in the center of the blinding beam, pulling the round drawing mirror from my bag. I angled it, not at the drivers, but out to sea. I blocked the beam, then unblocked it. Flash, flash, pause, flash. Flash, flash, pause, flash. The old code, the manual override. Danger, reef, turn port. Out on the black water, the harbor queen's horn blasted, a low, terrified sound, then twice more, in acknowledgement. We saw its lights shift. It was turning. It was turning. "No!" Jax Roon screamed, his voice breaking in pure rage. He raised his hand. He wasn't holding a laptop. He had a weapon. He wasn't aiming at Vasco. He was aiming at me. I didn't have time to breathe. Vasco was a wall of muscle and rage. He roared my name, a sound of pure animal terror. He slammed into me, knocking me off my feet, shoving me backward, crushing me into a shallow alcove in the lighthouse's thick stone foundation. His body was a complete shield over mine, his face buried in my hair, his arms locked around me like steel bands. A sharp, deafening crack echoed, splintering the stone right where my head had been. I was gasping, my teeth chattering from the impact. I was alive. I was completely encased by him. He was shaking, not from fear, from an adrenaline I'd never felt before. "Vasco," I whispered, my voice muffled against his chest. He pulled back, just an inch, his eyes black holes in the blinding lighthouse beam. His breathing was ragged. A dark tear, a graze, was scored across the shoulder of his jacket. The shot had missed me, but it had touched him. "Still here," he breathed, his voice a raw rasp. Before Jax could level his weapon for another shot, a dark shape dropped from the gantry above. Marco Kest. He landed silently on Jax's back, a perfect, brutal tackle. The weapon skittered across the wet concrete. Marco had Jax's arm twisted, his knee in his spine. The fight over. "Grid is stabilizing," Sarah's voice shrieked, tinny and triumphant from Vasco's earpiece. "Backup is online. They're lit up. Boss, I see them all. The port is ours." A new figure scrambled out of the darkness. From the tunnel I'd used, Eli. He was clutching a single silver USB drive. He was terrified, but he was here. "The final key," Eli shouted, stumbling toward the auxiliary panel. "It's not just the chips. It's the antidote, the kill code. It has to be plugged into the auxiliary." Eli jammed the drive into a small, modern port retrofitted onto the ancient panel. On Jax's fallen laptop, the blank map flooded with green light, every ship, every tanker, every tugboat, visible again. The air filled with new sirens, not just the harbor watch, but the heavy, wailing horns of the Port Garrison Fire Department, the real fire trucks. Finally. The battle was over. Vasco didn't let go of me. He pulled me to my feet, his hand finding mine, his grip crushing, knuckles white. He wasn't holding my hand, he was holding an anchor, refusing to let me drift. The newly formed Harbor Watch, the loyal cops, the ones not on Taskfire's payroll, swarmed the pier. Their commander saw Jack's rune in Marco's custody. He saw the graze on Vasco's shoulder. He saw the gun on the ground. He looked at Vasco, his hand on his own holster. Uncertain. This was still the Monarch Circle. But then they came from the shadows of the container yard, from the access roads, from the side alleys, the dock workers in their hard hats, the fishermen in their boots, the women from the wharf, my sister Nomi among them, pale but standing, protected by Marco's team. They walked onto the pier, their faces grim in the flashing red and blue lights. They didn't shout, they didn't threaten, they just stood. They formed a silent human wall. They stood between us, between Vasco and the Harbor Watch. They weren't afraid of him. They owed him. They owed him for Sal's hip replacement, for the women of the wharf sanctuary, for the youth center grants. Vasco stood there, his hand locked in mine, breathing in the salt and smoke. He looked at the wall of people, and for the first time, he didn't look like a king. He looked like a man who had finally, against all odds, come home. The siren stopped screaming at the pier and turned into a dull, bureaucratic flashing. The Harbor Watch commander, a man whose face was etched with exhaustion, looked at the gun on the ground. He looked at Jack's rune, who was pinned under Marco's unyielding grip, and he looked at the wall of fishermen, dock workers, and women Nomi standing right in the front who were silent, unmoving, and absolute. He didn't cross that line. He didn't have to. In that split second of standoff, of procedure taking over from panic, Jack's rune moved. He was an animal, all instinct. He used the commander's hesitation as a fulcrum, slamming his head back into Marco's face, breaking the hold. He didn't run for the city. He ran for the water. He scrambled over the side of the jetty and vanished into the black, churning harbor. An officer shouted. 2 beams of light hit the water, but he was gone, swallowed by the cold, dark tide. The rest was a blur of metallic-tasting exhaustion. Marco, wiping blood from his nose, took charge of Vasco's men, melting back into the shadows. The MVM, shamed and leaderless, finally got its act together. Helping the fire crews with the container blaze, Sarah Witt coordinated with the Harbor Watch, handing over the data from Eli's kill code drive. Vasco never let go of my hand. He led me through the wall of people, who parted for us like the sea itself. He put me in his car, drove me back to my loft, and walked me up the rattling stairs. He checked the locks, the windows, the dark alley below. He looked at me, the graze on his shoulder already a dark, ugly line. "Rest, Lark," he'd said. "I will handle the cleanup." I woke up hours later, not to sirens, but to the smell of rust, salt, and waffles. Dawn over Port Garrison. The city hadn't broken. It was bruised, hungover, but alive. Down in Salt Row, the waffle cart vendor was open for business, a defiant puff of sugary steam against the gray morning. Ria's column was already live on the North Star Press website. She hadn't slept. The headline was pure poetry. No monument for lighthouse burners. She laid it all out, the task fire data, Calderon's arrest, the blind signal, the failed coup at Pier 13. The city was saved, but the questions were just beginning. The official cleanup was brutal and fast. Commissioner Calderon resigned from a jail cell. The MVM, in a desperate public act of self-preservation, was dissolved and restructured under a new provisional government. They called it the Clean Slate Harbor Panel. The task fire agents were all arrested, their racket finished. And Arclight, with Jack's rune presumed drowned and their entire protection network dismantled. They shattered. They were ghosts, scattered to the wind. The true cleanup, the human one, came 3 days later. The stress of blind signal night, of seeing a gun pointed at her sister, had been too much. Nomi went into labor. I was there, at Mariner's Blue Medical Center, in the delivery room. I was the one holding her hand, my knuckles white, telling her to breathe. "You've got this. Noams?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. "You're the strongest person I know. Push." Vasco was there. He wasn't in the room. Not at first. He stood in the hallway, just outside the open door. A silent guardian in a dark suit. He didn't pace. He just stood, his hand resting on the doorframe, listening. And when the baby cried, that first, sharp, furious wail of life, I looked up. Vasco was standing in the threshold, his mask completely gone. His eyes were wet. He wasn't looking at me, or even at Nomi. He was staring at that tiny, screaming new thing, and he was completely, utterly undone. He was the man born in monochrome, witnessing the big bang of color, and it had leveled him. He just watched, silent. As I cut the cord and the nurse placed the baby on my sister's chest, he was learning. He was learning that some things, you don't protect by building a wall, you protect them by giving them space. Nomi named him Saul, for the sun, she whispered, her face pale, sweaty, and more beautiful than I'd ever seen it, because he's my light. His birth certificate read Saul Navarro, the Clean Slate Panel, eager to clean up every loose end from the MVM mess, had made the paperwork frictionless. Eli Shore's name was nowhere near it. Eli had kept his end. His testimony from a secure location, backed by the data on the drive, was the final nail in Taskfire's coffin. He'd traded his parental rights for a clean conscience and a reduced sentence. He'd chosen to be a witness, not a father. Life settled. The city began to heal. I finished the mural at St. Meridian. The $20,000 grant had finally been put to use. Vasco and I, we were quiet. We were slow. The frantic, desperate adrenaline was gone, replaced by something that felt like gravity. We'd seen each other at our most elemental. Now, we had to learn to be normal. He met me at the Driftglass Community Center. It was open again. The kids painting a new ocean scene on the wall I'd prepped. The gift box from the Falcon had been disposed of by Sierra's team. An unstable, but thankfully simple, pressure plate device, she'd called it, as if she were describing a faulty toaster. Vasco wasn't in a suit. He was in jeans and a dark gray shirt. He looked normal. He looked like the man I'd sketched, asleep in the plastic chair. He wasn't holding a ring. He held out a single, plain, brass key. "The lease on this building was up," he said, his voice quiet. "Just for me. The city was going to sell it to a developer, so I bought it. The foundation is gifting it to the community." He looked at the walls, at the kids. "The new sign arrives tomorrow. It just says Driftglass." He pressed the key into my hand. It was warm. "This," he said, his thumb brushing mine, "is for the studio upstairs, the one with the good light. It has your name on it. Lark. If you want it, it's home." I looked at the key in my palm. It was solid. It was real. It wasn't a penthouse. It wasn't a fortress. It was a home. "You told me once," I whispered, looking up at him, "that you weren't a knight." A small, slow smile touched his lips, the real one. "I'm not." He looked at his own hands, the ones that had shattered a frame and caught me from a fall. "I'm just a man. learning how to keep his sword sheathed. We didn't kiss then. We kissed on the roof of my old loft, the one with the tin ceiling. I was packing my last box of paints. He'd come to help me move. We stood there, the wind whipping off the harbor, the air smelling of salt and new chances. He reached out, not to grab me, not to pull me, but to gently brush a strand of hair from my face. I leaned into his touch. He rested his forehead against mine. His hands settled on my waist, mine on his shoulders. We just stood there, breathing, our rhythm finally matching the tide. It was a kiss that tasted like the ocean, and charcoal, and a future I hadn't known how to paint. Ria ran a community direct live stream that weekend. She showed the finished mural on the wall of Meridian. It was the lighthouse, the old one, its beam cutting through a dark, stylized storm. But the beam wasn't just light. If you looked closer, it was made of the faces of Port Garrison. Sal, the gatekeeper, Nomi, holding Saul, the fisherman from the quay. At the bottom, I'd painted the words I'd promised myself in that cold church. If hell is night, we will learn the language of the lamps. Vasco kept his promise, too. Doc 6, the one Calderon had tried to bribe him with, wasn't folded into the consortium. It was formally signed over, in a public ceremony, to the Salt Row Fishermen's Co-op, the DeMarco Foundation. Once a shield was becoming a sword for the city. The money was flowing, not into ghost buildings, but into harbor medical clinics and trade school scholarships. That night, we stood on the balcony of Eider Tower. The glass walls reflected the thousands of lights from the city below. Our city. He came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, pulling me back against his chest. He was solid, warm. He rested his chin on my shoulder, and we just watched the harbor. "Take me to every place you call home," he murmured, his voice a low, soft rumble against my back. I smiled, leaning my head back against his. I covered his hands with mine. "Okay, but we'll start with the kitchen that smells like orange peels." It felt finished. It felt safe. And that's when it happened. My phone, the burner phone, the one he'd given me, the one I kept in the pocket of my jacket, vibrated. I pulled it out. Vasco tensed, his arms tightening around me. He'd recognized which phone it was. An anonymous number? A text message. 2 words. Beak lives. My heart didn't stop. My blood didn't run cold. The old Lark would have panicked. The old Lark would have been terrified. I just stared at the words. The Falcon. He was alive. Which meant Jack's rune wasn't at the bottom of the harbor. He was out there. I didn't say anything. I just turned off the screen. I turned in his arms to face him. He saw it in my eyes. He knew. I didn't have to be afraid. I wasn't alone. I took his hand. He laced his fingers through mine, a silent, ironclad promise. We both turned, side by side, away from the glittering, safe city, and faced the vast, dark, open ocean. The battle for Port Garrison was over, but the war was just beginning. This city would have to learn to keep its lights on. And so would we. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Where in the world are you listening from? Let me know in the comments below so we can connect. And please share your thoughts on Lark and Vasco's journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories and like this video. If you want to support the channel and help this story reach more people, please consider hitting that hype button. It helps more than you know.